Flight attendant Janet Reynolds stares in horror at her reflection in the airplane bathroom mirror, her hands trembling. Blood trickles from a cut on her lip. The intercom announces an emergency landing. Her career, once soaring high, now crashes in flames over what she did to those innocent twin girls. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on stories of justice being served. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination happening right before your eyes? Let's find out how this flight attendant's actions changed lives forever. Zoe and Amber Washington could barely contain their excitement as they stood in line at the security checkpoint of O'Hare International Airport. The 10-year-old twins were practically bouncing on their toes, their identical cornrow braids adorned with colorful beads that clicked softly with each movement. Today marked their first time flying alone, a 5-hour journey from Chicago to Atlanta to visit their grandmother for summer vacation. "Remember everything Mom taught us," Amber whispered, clutching her carry-on bag with A.W. monogrammed on its side. "Boarding passes ready. ID cards visible. Stay together at all times," Zoe recited, patting the special lanyard around her neck that identified them as unaccompanied minors. The twins' father, Dr. Derek Washington, a cardiac surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, had arranged everything meticulously. He stood behind them in line, his physician's hands resting protectively on their shoulders. At 42, Dr. Washington had built a reputation as one of Chicago's most skilled heart surgeons, saving countless lives with his steady hands and innovative techniques. His wife, Letitia Washington, the principal of a prestigious elementary school, had prepared the girls for weeks for this journey. "You two are going to be perfect," Dr. Washington assured them. "Grandma can't wait to see you. She's already planned a whole schedule of activities." Letitia had created detailed instruction cards for each girl. "Keep these in your pockets," she had told them that morning as she handed them laminated index cards with emergency contacts, flight information, and step-by-step procedures for navigating the airport. "And remember, always be polite, but never let anyone make you feel less than who you are." The Washington family represented everything the American dream promised, but often failed to deliver to Black families like theirs. Their suburban home, prestigious careers, and well-mannered children contradicted the stereotypes that frequently clouded others' perceptions of them. Despite their accomplishments, they still faced the subtle and not-so-subtle prejudices that persisted in American society. As they approached the security checkpoint, the twins noticed how the TSA agent's eyes lingered on them longer than on the white children ahead of them. When it was their turn, the agent scrutinized their documents with exaggerated care. "And where are your parents?" he asked, despite Dr. Washington standing right beside them. "I'm their father," Dr. Washington said, his voice measured but firm. "They're flying as unaccompanied minors. All the documentation is in order." The agent nodded, but still called over a colleague for a second opinion on their paperwork. Letitia had prepared them for this too. "Sometimes people will treat you differently," she had explained. "It's not about you, it's about them. Hold your head high and know your worth." After clearing security, they walked to the gate where airline staff verified their unaccompanied minor status. The special badges around their necks marked them for additional supervision, which their mother had assured them was for their protection. Dr. Washington would stay until they boarded, but from there they would be on their own, until their grandmother, Evelyn Washington, met them at the arrival gate in Atlanta. The twins shared not just identical DNA, but a connection that seemed almost supernatural. They often completed each other's sentences, sensed each other's emotions, and instinctively protected one another. Zoe, older by 7 minutes, took her role as big sister seriously. Amber, more outspoken and analytical, often served as their voice. "Dad, our seats are together, right?" Amber confirmed as they waited at the gate. Dr. Washington pulled out his phone and showed them the confirmation email. "Seats 24A and 24B, right next to each other. I paid extra to make sure of it." As boarding began, the twins hugged their father tightly. "Call me as soon as you land," he reminded them. "I've already spoken to the flight attendants. They know to keep an eye on you." What Dr. Washington couldn't have known was that one particular flight attendant would be keeping an eye on his daughters for all the wrong reasons. The twins joined the boarding line, their tickets for seats 24A and 24B clutched tightly in Amber's hand. They noticed how some passengers seemed to quicken their pace to avoid standing near them, how others' gazes slid past them as if they were invisible. These were the small indignities they had learned to notice, but not internalize as their parents had taught them. "Boarding passes, please," said the gate agent, a young man with a friendly smile. He checked their documentation efficiently. "Seats 24A and 24B. You're all set, girls. The flight attendants will help you get settled." As they walked down the jetway, Zoe squeezed Amber's hand. "This is it," she whispered. "Our big adventure." They couldn't have imagined just how eventful their first solo flight was about to become. Janet Reynolds fastened the final button on her navy blue Horizon Airlines uniform and adjusted her scarf in the crew lounge mirror. At 42, she had spent the last 15 years as a flight attendant, the last 7 as a senior crew member. The job had once been her passion, the travel, the people, the sense of purpose. But somewhere along the way, the spark had died, replaced by a smoldering resentment she masked behind a practiced smile. 3 years of divorce proceedings had left Janet bitter and financially strained. Her ex-husband had moved on quickly, starting a new family with his younger girlfriend, while Janet was still picking up extra shifts to cover her legal fees. Each passing year seemed to harden something inside her, calcifying her worldview into rigid categories of deserving and undeserving people. "Overbooked again," complained her colleague Miguel as he reviewed the flight manifest. "Corporate keeps squeezing in more passengers, but expects us to deal with the fallout." Janet sighed. "Let me guess, we'll be playing musical chairs at 30,000 feet. As a senior flight attendant, she often handled seating conflicts, a task that increasingly brought out the worst in her. "We're oversold by 2 seats, Miguel confirmed. "Gates trying to find volunteers to take the next flight, but you know how that goes." Janet nodded grimly. Overbooked flights meant confrontations, complaints, and additional work. It also meant making judgment calls about who would be inconvenienced, judgments that Janet increasingly made based on her own prejudices rather than airline policy. The boarding process began, and Janet took her position at the front of the plane, greeting passengers with her professional smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had developed a knack for sizing people up in an instant, who would be trouble, who could be easily managed, who deserved special attention. When she spotted the Washington twins walking down the aisle, something in her expression shifted imperceptibly. 2 young black girls traveling alone, dressed in matching outfits that screamed middle-class comfort. Janet's eyes narrowed slightly as she noted their confident postures, their quality luggage, the easy way they navigated the narrow aisle as if they belonged there. "Unaccompanied minors?" Janet asked as they approached her, tone notably cooler than it had been with previous passengers. "Yes, ma'am," Zoe answered politely. "We're going to visit our grandmother in Atlanta." Janet checked their boarding passes with exaggerated thoroughness. Seats 24A and 24B. She frowned slightly, making a mental calculation. Those were good seats in the center of the plane seats that could solve her overbooking problem if they were made available for other passengers. Passengers Janet deemed more deserving. "Wait here," she instructed the girl, stepping aside to consult her tablet. The seat map showed the adjacent seats were indeed assigned to the twins. Both had been properly purchased and confirmed. But Janet was already formulating a story, a computer error that could be used to her advantage. As Janet contemplated her next move, a commotion at the front of the plane caught her attention. Harold Barrett, a 50-something white businessman in an expensive suit, was arguing with Miguel about his seat assignment. "This is unacceptable," Barrett was saying, his voice carrying down the aisle. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. I specifically requested an aisle seat." Janet immediately moved to intervene, her demeanor transforming entirely. "Mr. Barrett, isn't it?" she said, reading his name off the boarding pass. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. Let me see what I can do to help you." The contrast was striking. With the twins, Janet had been curt and suspicious. With Barrett, she was solicitous and accommodating, bending over backward to solve his problem. "We're unfortunately overbooked today," Janet explained to Barrett, her tone apologetic. "But I believe I can find you an appropriate seat." Her eyes flicked back to where the twins stood waiting, and a plan formed in her mind. Janet led Barrett and the twins to row 24. "Girls, there seems to be a problem with your reservation," she announced, her voice taking on an official tone. "According to our system, you were only assigned one seat, not two." Amber frowned immediately, suspicious. "That can't be right. Our dad bought 2 tickets. We have the confirmation." Janet's smile tightened. "Sometimes the system makes errors. Unfortunately, with the flight being completely full, we need to respect the current seat assignments." She turned to Barrett. "Mr. Barrett's seat 24B is available for you." Zoe, usually the quieter twin, spoke up. "But we have 2 boarding passes." See, she held up their tickets, clearly showing seats 24A and 24B assigned to Amber and Zoe Washington. Janet's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. She wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially by children, and particularly not by black children who seemed to know their rights. "Those were issued by mistake," she insisted. "The computer shows only 1 seat was paid for." This was a complete fabrication, but Janet calculated that the twins would be easier to manipulate than an adult passenger. She was wrong. Amber, her young face serious, recited from memory. "According to FAA regulations, each passenger requires their own seat. 2 tickets were purchased for us, and we have confirmation. It would be unsafe for us to share a seat." Janet was taken aback by the child's knowledge, but quickly recovered. "Young lady, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I think I know the regulations." Her tone carried a warning, but the twins stood their ground. Sensing the brewing confrontation, Amber discreetly reached into her pocket and activated the video recording function on her phone, another safety measure their parents had taught them. Other passengers were beginning to notice the exchange. A woman in the row behind Rebecca Taylor watched the interaction, with increasing interest, her expression unreadable. Janet leaned closer to the twins, lowering her voice. "Girls, you're holding up the boarding process. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to ask the captain to have you removed from the flight." The threat hung in the air, calculated to frighten them into compliance. Amber's hand trembled slightly, but the phone kept recording. "Mr. Barrett, please take seat 24B, Janet said loudly, deliberately turning away from the twins. "Girls, you'll have to share seat 24A for this flight." Barrett hesitated, looking uncomfortable with the situation. "Are you sure this is right? They do have 2 boarding passes." "It's a system error," Janet insisted firmly. "Happens all the time with these electronic tickets." "The seat is yours, sir." Barrett, still looking uncertain, but not willing to give up his seat, after his earlier complaints, slowly sat down in 24B. Janet looked expectantly at the twins. "Well, we need to continue boarding." The girls exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. They knew this was wrong, but they also recognized the precarious position they were in. 2 black children against an authority figure who had just threatened to remove them from the plane. Their grandmother was expecting them. Their father had already left the airport. With dignity beyond their years, they squeezed into seat 24A together, their small frames pressed uncomfortably against each other and the window. The recording continued, capturing every moment of Janet's discrimination. "Enjoy your flight," Janet said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, already turning away to attend to other passengers, white passengers, with far more courtesy and attention. What Janet didn't realize was that her actions in the next few hours would not only change the trajectory of her career, but force her to confront the prejudices she had harbored and denied for far too long. "This isn't right," Zoe whispered to her sister, as they struggled to find a comfortable position in the single seat. Their slender frames were pressed tightly together, the armrest digging into Amber's side. "Dad bought 2 tickets. Amber nodded, keeping her phone partially concealed but still recording. I know. But remember what Mom said about picking our battles. Let's get to Atlanta first, then tell Grandma. In the aisle seat beside them, Harold Barrett pretended to be absorbed in his phone, but the occasional glance in their direction betrayed his discomfort with the situation. He knew something wasn't right, but had chosen the path of least resistance. As the final passengers boarded, the twins tried to fasten the single seatbelt around both of them, an awkward and ultimately futile exercise that left them essentially unsecured. Flight regulations required each passenger to have their own seatbelt, a fact Janet Reynolds was deliberately ignoring. "Excuse me," Zoe called out as Janet passed by their row. "We can't both buckle up with one seatbelt." Janet barely paused. "Just take turns wearing it. Fasten it when the light is on, and you can share it otherwise." She continued down the aisle without waiting for a response, her dismissive tone making it clear that their safety was not her priority. "That's against FAA safety regulations," Amber said loudly, her voice carrying to nearby passengers. "Each passenger must be properly secured during takeoff, landing, and turbulence." Janet stopped abruptly and turned back her practiced smile, now brittle. "Young lady, I've told you not to be disruptive. This is your final warning." From across the aisle, a woman in her 30s with auburn hair watched the exchange with growing interest. Rebecca Taylor had been observing the situation since the twins first boarded. Unlike other passengers who averted their eyes from the uncomfortable scene, she seemed to be paying particular attention, occasionally making notes on her phone. "Is there a problem here?" Rebecca asked, her voice calm but authoritative. Janet's demeanor shifted instantly. "No problem at all. Just explaining our seating policy to the children." "I see, Rebecca," replied her gaze, moving between Janet and the twins. "And what exactly is that policy regarding two passengers sharing a single seat?" The question hung in the air, pointed, and impossible to deflect. Other passengers were now openly watching the confrontation, some recording discreetly on their phones. Janet's smile tightened further. "I'm simply managing an overbooked situation as per airline protocol. Now, if you'll excuse me, we need to prepare for departure." She turned to address all passengers. "Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, tray tables are up, and seats are in the upright position for takeoff." As Janet moved away, Rebecca leaned across the aisle toward the twins. "Keep recording," she whispered, "and send that video to someone if you can before we take off." Amber nodded, already composing a text to their parents with the video attached. The in-flight Wi-Fi wasn't operational yet, but she had just enough cell service to send the message before being instructed to switch to airplane mode. The plane began to pull away from the gate, the engines humming to life as it taxied toward the runway. The twins remained squeezed into the single seat, uncomfortable and anxious, but determined to document everything. "Dad will fix this when we land," Zoe reassured her sister, though doubt crept into her voice. 5 hours was a long time to stay in this cramped position. Harold Barrett shifted uncomfortably in seat 24B, avoiding eye contact with the girls. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he was complicit in a situation that was clearly discriminatory. The flight attendant had manipulated the situation, and he had allowed it because it benefited him. The realization didn't sit well with him, but he remained silent. As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, the twins held hands tightly. They had been excited about this adventure, their first time flying alone. Now they were facing a situation their parents had warned them about, but could never fully prepare them for being treated differently because of the color of their skin. What they didn't know was that their ordeal had only just begun, and that the video Amber had managed to send would soon set in motion events that would transform what should have been a routine flight into national news. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, Janet began the drink service, moving methodically down the aisle. When she reached row 24, she served Harold Barrett first, offering him a full selection of beverages and snacks. When she turned to the twins, her demeanor changed noticeably. "One drink for your shared seat," she stated flatly, placing a single small cup of apple juice on their tray table. "We'd each like a drink, please," Amber said politely but firmly. "And we each paid for a full beverage service with our tickets." Janet's eyes narrowed. "You're sharing a seat, so you'll share a drink. That's the policy. It wasn't any policy, of course, but rather Janet's continued attempt to assert her authority and reinforce her discriminatory treatment. There's no such policy, Zoe countered, her voice quiet but steady. We each have a ticket for this flight. The confrontation was escalating, drawing more attention from surrounding passengers. Some began to murmur among themselves, questioning Janet's actions. Is there a problem here? Rebecca Taylor asked again, her voice carrying clearly across the aisle. Janet turned her professional mask, slipping further. Ma'am, please stay out of this. I'm handling the situation. Yes, Rebecca replied calmly. I can see exactly how you're handling it. The twins could sense an ally in Rebecca, but they were still alone in a hostile environment, facing a 5-hour flight of discrimination and discomfort. What they didn't realize was that their quiet dignity in the face of injustice had already begun to win them supporters throughout the cabin, and that the video Amber had sent was about to change everything. 30,000 feet above the American Midwest, Zoe and Amber Washington shifted uncomfortably in their shared seat. An hour into the 5-hour flight from Chicago to Atlanta, their legs were cramping and their backs ached from the awkward position. The twins took turns sitting partially on the armrest, neither able to fully relax or enjoy the journey they had so eagerly anticipated. My foot's falling asleep, Amber whispered, trying to adjust her position without disturbing her sister. Switch sides again, Zoe suggested, and they carefully maneuvered to trade places, a complex choreography in the confined space. Each time Janet Reynolds passed by their row, she pointedly ignored their discomfort. When Zoe raised her hand to request water, Janet breezed past as if she hadn't seen her. Minutes later, the twins watched as she cheerfully offered a second round of drinks to white passengers in the surrounding rows. Is she going to ignore us the whole flight? Amber wondered, her voice barely audible over the drone of the engines. The contrast in Janet's behavior was becoming increasingly obvious. For white passengers, she was attentive and accommodating. For the twins, she was dismissive at best, hostile at worst. It was a pattern that reflected her deeply ingrained prejudices she would never acknowledge even to herself. Have you ever experienced or witnessed this kind of treatment on a flight? Comment number 1 if you've seen flight attendants treat different passengers unequally, or number 2 if you've always received fair service in the skies. Remember to hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their age or race. Are you wondering what will happen to these brave young girls? Subscribe to find out as this shocking story continues. In seat 24B, Harold Barrett was growing increasingly uncomfortable both with his role in the situation and with Janet's obvious discrimination. He had initially convinced himself that the seating issue was simply an unfortunate mistake, but as he watched Janet's differential treatment continue, he could no longer maintain that fiction. Would you girls like some of my pretzels? He offered awkwardly, extending the unopened package. It was a small gesture, nowhere near enough to compensate for his complicity, but it marked the beginning of a shift in his perspective. Amber politely declined. No, thank you, sir. We each got our own snacks with our tickets. We just haven't been served yet. Barrett nodded, the pointed response not lost on him. He turned to signal Janet, intending to request service for the twins, but she deliberately avoided eye contact with him. As the flight progressed, the plane encountered a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign illuminated, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The twins faced an impossible dilemma. Their shared seat had only one seatbelt, which could not secure both of them properly. As the plane shuddered and dropped suddenly, Amber was nearly thrown from the seat, saved only by Zoe's quick reflexes as she grabbed her sister's arm. This is dangerous, Rebecca Taylor observed from across the aisle, no longer bothering to hide her disapproval. Those girls need separate seats, with proper safety restraints. Janet, making her way through the cabin to check seatbelts, paused at row 24. Seatbelts fastened, she instructed, her gaze fixed on the twins. "We can't both use one seatbelt," Zoe explained, trying to keep her voice steady as the plane continued to bounce through rough air. "It's not safe." "Figure it out," Janet replied coldly before moving on, her indifference to their safety now apparent to everyone in the surrounding rows. What the twins and other passengers couldn't know was that this wasn't the first time Janet had exhibited such behavior. Throughout her 15 years as a flight attendant, there had been incidents, subtle discriminatory actions, complaints filed, and quietly resolved reprimands buried in her personnel file. Horizon Airlines had repeatedly overlooked these red flags, allowing Janet's prejudices to fester beneath her professional veneer. There was the time she had accidentally spilled hot coffee on a Middle Eastern passenger who had requested a special meal. The incident report had been filed away after a perfunctory investigation. There was the Hispanic family she had accused of having counterfeit tickets, forcing them to miss their connection while the issue was resolved. The airline had issued a travel voucher and considered the matter closed. Pattern after pattern, incident after incident, Janet's behavior had been excused or ignored by an airline more concerned with avoiding controversy than addressing the root problem. Until now. As the turbulence subsided, the twins whispered to each other, debating whether to try contacting their parents again when they landed. They worried about being labeled troublemakers or difficult concerns that no 10-year-old should have to consider, but that many black children learn early. "Should we talk to the pilot when we land?" Amber suggested. "What if they don't believe us? What if they think we're making trouble?" Zoe worried. "We have the video," Amber reminded her. "And that lady across the aisle seems to be on our side." Indeed, Rebecca Taylor had been watching everything unfold with increasing concern, making notes on her phone and occasionally making calls when Janet wasn't looking. What no one yet realized was that Rebecca's interest in the situation was far from casual. The twins continued to endure their uncomfortable arrangement, taking turns using the single seatbelt whenever turbulence struck or when the fasten seatbelt sign was illuminated. They shared a single bathroom break, hurrying to ensure they weren't separated during the journey, as their mother had warned. Through it all, they maintained the dignity and composure their parents had instilled in them, even as they experienced treatment no child should ever face. They didn't know that their quiet resistance captured in Amber's video was already having an impact far beyond the confines of the aircraft, or that Janet Reynolds' years of unchecked discrimination were about to catch up with her in ways she never could have anticipated. While Horizon Airlines Flight 2857 cruised at 30,000 feet, the video Amber Washington had managed to send before takeoff was creating a firestorm on the ground. Dr. Derek Washington had just finished a 4-hour cardiac procedure when he checked his phone in the surgical lounge. The message from Amber contained a 2-minute video that made his blood run cold. His daughters articulate and composed, despite their obvious distress being forced to share a seat while a white passenger occupied what should have been Zoe's place. The flight attendant's dismissive tone and thinly veiled threats were captured clearly in the recording. "Letitia, you need to see this now," he said into his phone, his voice tight with controlled fury. As the chief of cardiothoracic surgery doctor, Washington was accustomed to maintaining composure in crisis situations, but this was different. These were his children. Across town at Lakeside Academy, Principal Letitia Washington excused herself from a faculty meeting and watched the video in her office, her professional demeanor cracking as she witnessed her daughter's mistreatment. "I'm calling Thomas," she said, referring to Thomas Franklin, the family's attorney and longtime friend. Then the airline. Then the FAA. The Washington parents' response was swift and strategic. They weren't just concerned parents. They were educated professionals with resources and connections, exactly the kind of adversaries Horizon Airlines should have feared. Within 30 minutes, Thomas Franklin had received the video and begun drafting legal communications to Horizon Airlines, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Department of Transportation. The video clearly documented multiple violations, discrimination, safety regulations regarding one passenger per seat, proper use of seatbelts, and the flight attendant's retaliatory behavior. "This is textbook discrimination with FAA safety violations compounding it," Franklin observed. The airline can't claim ignorance when we have everything documented. But the Washington's methodical legal approach was soon overtaken by the unpredictable power of social media. Letitia's sister Maya Turner, a popular lifestyle blogger with a significant social media following, had also received the video. Outraged by the treatment of her nieces, she posted the clip to her accounts with the hashtag number 2 tickets 1 seat. Watch as my 10-year-old nieces are forced to share a seat on at Horizon Air while a white man gets their paid-for seat. The flight attendant threatens to remove them for asking questions. This is what discrimination looks like in America today. Number 2. Tickets, 1 seat. The video exploded across platforms, racking up hundreds of thousands of views within the first hour. Media outlets picked up the story first, the digital news sites, then the major networks. Aviation bloggers and consumer rights advocates amplified the outrage, analyzing each moment of the video and identifying multiple FAA violations. This isn't just discrimination, it's dangerous, noted one popular aviation YouTuber. Having 2 passengers share a seat and seatbelt violates fundamental safety protocols. This flight attendant endangered children to accommodate an adult white passenger. By the 2-hour mark of the 5-hour flight, number 2 tickets 1 seat was trending nationally. Horizon Airlines' social media accounts were flooded with angry comments demanding accountability. The company's initial response, a generic statement about investigating the matter, only fueled the backlash. We are aware of a video circulating regarding a seating issue on one of our flights. We take these matters seriously and are investigating the situation. Horizon Airlines is committed to treating all passengers with respect. The corporate non-apology was immediately torn apart online, with commenters pointing out that this wasn't a seating issue, but discrimination and safety violations involving children. Back on the plane, passengers were beginning to connect to the in-flight Wi-Fi, and news of the viral video began to spread through the cabin. Those who had witnessed the incident firsthand were now discovering that it had become national news. Some began to re-watch the video on their devices, glancing between their screens, and the real-life twins still uncomfortably sharing seat 24A. Janet Reynolds remained oblivious to the brewing storm. With no reason to check social media during her shift, she continued her duties, maintaining her differential treatment of passengers based on her own biases. She had no idea that her actions were being discussed by thousands of people on the ground, or that Horizon Airlines executives were frantically meeting to contain what was quickly becoming a major public relations disaster. In the executive conference room at Horizon headquarters in Dallas, CEO Richard Blackwell had assembled his crisis management team. The company's chief legal counsel looked grim as she outlined the potential liabilities. "We're facing multiple issues here," she explained. "Discrimination claims, safety violations, potential civil rights complaints. The FAA could fine us for the seatbelt violation alone. The fact that this involves minors makes it exponentially worse from both a legal and public relations perspective." The head of operations was already on the phone with the flight tracking system. "Flight 2857 is over Kentucky right now, about halfway to Atlanta. We need to contact the captain immediately." Blackwell nodded grimly. "Do it. This needs to be addressed before they land. The longer those children stay in that situation, the worse this gets for everyone." The directive went out immediately. Captain Leonard Wilson was to be informed of the situation and instructed to resolve it at once. In the cockpit of Flight 2857, Captain Wilson received the urgent communication from headquarters. He reviewed the message twice, his expression darkening as he understood the gravity of the situation. "Get Reynolds up here now," he instructed his co-pilot. "We have a serious situation developing." Meanwhile, in the cabin, the atmosphere was changing. As more passengers became aware of the viral video, their attitudes toward Janet shifted from passive observation to active disapproval. Some began to openly stare at her as she moved through the cabin. Others deliberately engaged the twins in friendly conversation, offering them snacks and showing them subtle support. Janet noticed the change, but misinterpreted it as general passenger restlessness. She had no idea that her actions had been recorded, shared, and were now being condemned by people across the country, or that her career at Horizon Airlines was rapidly approaching its end. The twins, still uncomfortable but bolstered by the growing support around them, continued to endure the situation with remarkable poise. They didn't know about the viral video, or that their parents had mobilized a legal response. They simply knew that they were being treated unfairly and were doing their best to document it as their parents had taught them. What none of the passengers yet realized was that this flight was about to take an unexpected detour, one that would bring Janet Reynolds face to face with the consequences of her actions sooner than anyone anticipated. "Miss Reynolds, the captain, needs to see you in the cockpit immediately." Janet looked up from restocking the beverage cart to see First Officer Martinez standing in the galley, his expression unreadable. Something about his tone made her stomach tighten. "Is there a problem?" she asked, attempting to maintain her professional demeanor. "The captain will brief you," Martinez replied, his typically friendly manner noticeably absent. As Janet made her way to the cockpit, she mentally reviewed the flight so far. There had been the minor issue with those twins, but she had handled it according to her judgment. Surely that wasn't what this was about. Captain Leonard Wilson had been flying for Horizon Airlines for 22 years. His weathered face and calm demeanor usually put his crew at ease, but as Janet entered the cockpit, she found him unusually stern. "Close the door, Miss Reynolds." Janet complied, her apprehension growing. "I've just received an urgent communication from headquarters." Wilson began holding up his tablet. "Are you aware that your interaction with the Washington twins in row 24 was recorded and is currently viral on social media?" Janet's face went pale. What?" Wilson turned the tablet toward her, showing a news site with the embedded video. The headline read, "Airline under fire after flight attendant forces black twin girls to share seat." "That's not." "I was managing an overbooking situation," Janet stammered, watching as the video clearly showed her fabricating the computer error and threatening the well-behaved children. "You violated at least 3 FAA safety regulations," Wilson stated flatly. "2 passengers cannot share a single seat and seat belt. That's basic safety protocol. And according to headquarters, both girls had valid tickets for separate seats." Janet's defenses began to crumble. "I was just trying to solve the overbooking." By discriminating against children based on their race, Wilson finished for her. "That's how it looks to everyone watching this video, including the FAA, which has already contacted our company." The reality of her situation began to dawn on Janet. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug or explained away. The evidence was right there, recorded and shared with the world. "Headquarters has instructed me to rectify this situation immediately," Wilson continued. "We're going to make an unscheduled landing in Charlotte to deal with this matter properly. Miss Reynolds, you are suspended pending further investigation." Suspended? Janet's voice rose in disbelief. "Over a seating issue?" Wilson's expression hardened.
"This is far more than a seating issue, and I think you know that. You endangered the safety of minors in our care and potentially exposed this airline to significant liability."
"Consider yourself fortunate if suspension is the extent of it." Janet left the cockpit in a daze, her mind racing to find justifications, explanations, anyone else to blame. But deep down, a part of her recognized the truth she had been avoiding for years. Her actions had been driven by prejudices she had never confronted. As she returned to the cabin, Janet could feel the change in the atmosphere. Passengers were watching her, some openly filming on their phones. The customary deference to her authority had evaporated. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Wilson. Due to an operational issue, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Charlotte, North Carolina. We apologize for any inconvenience and expect only a brief delay before continuing to Atlanta. Please remain seated as the flight attendants prepare the cabin for landing." A murmur ran through the cabin as passengers speculated about the reason for the diversion. Many already knew, having seen the viral video during the flight. Janet moved mechanically through her landing preparations, avoiding eye contact with the passengers, especially those near row 24. When she had to pass the Washington twins, she kept her gaze fixed straight ahead. Rebecca Taylor chose this moment to make her move. Rising from her seat, she approached Janet in the galley area. "Ms. Reynolds, I believe we need to talk." Janet turned her professional mask, now brittle and cracking. "Passengers need to remain seated during landing preparations." Rebecca held up an identification card. "Rebecca Taylor, Horizon Airlines Chief Compliance Officer. I was conducting a random flight audit when I witnessed your treatment of the Washington twins. I've documented multiple policy violations and have been in contact with headquarters throughout the flight." Janet's world seemed to tilt sideways. A compliance officer on her flight witnessing everything. This wasn't just a passenger recording a video. This was an official company representative, documenting her actions from a position of authority. I was following procedure for overbooked flights," Janet attempted weakly. "No, you weren't," Rebecca replied firmly. "You violated company policy, FAA regulations, and possibly civil rights laws. The company has instructed me to inform you that you'll be meeting with HR representatives in Charlotte. The twins will be properly accommodated for the remainder of the journey." As the reality of her situation sank in, Janet felt a surge of panic. Her career, her reputation, her livelihood, all were now in jeopardy because of decisions she had made based on biases she had never acknowledged. In row 24, Harold Barrett had been listening to the surrounding conversations and piecing together what was happening. As the plane began its descent into Charlotte, he made a decision. Turning to the twins, he spoke awkwardly but sincerely. "I want to apologize to you both. I knew something wasn't right, but I went along with it because it was convenient for me. That was wrong." The twins regarded him silently, their young faces serious and thoughtful. Barrett continued, "I'm going to tell them the truth when we land. The flight attendant told me to take this seat even though she knew it was assigned to one of you. I should have refused." "Thank you for telling the truth," Amber said simply, her maturity striking in contrast to the adults who had failed her. As the plane touched down in Charlotte, Janet caught her reflection in a service panel, her uniform disheveled, her lipstick smudged, her expression haunted. The image of confidence and authority she had cultivated over 15 years had unraveled in a matter of hours, revealing the person she had become, someone who would endanger children because of the color of their skin. The realization was like a physical blow. Janet stumbled into the lavatory, locking the door behind her. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her hands trembling as the full weight of her actions crashed down on her. A sob escaped her throat, followed by another. She had done this, no one else. Her prejudices, her choices, her responsibility. As she dabbed at her face with a paper towel, Janet caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror and turned sharply, striking her lip on the edge of the sink. A small cut open, blood trickling down her chin, the same image from the story's opening, now fully contextualized in the moment of her reckoning. The intercom crackled. "Cabin crew prepare for arrival and immediate deplaning. Ground personnel will be boarding upon arrival." Janet's career was effectively over. But for the Washington twins, a different journey, one of justice and vindication, was just beginning. The Airbus A320 taxied to a remote stand at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, away from the regular gates and the curious eyes of other travelers. As the engines wound down, an unusual silence fell over the cabin. The normal bustle of passengers preparing to deplane was replaced by a tense anticipation. Captain Wilson's voice came over the intercom, measured and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned earlier, we've made an unscheduled landing in Charlotte to address an operational issue. We ask that you remain seated until further instructions. Representatives from Horizon Airlines will be boarding shortly. We apologize for this inconvenience and appreciate your patience." Through the windows, passengers could see several vehicles approaching the aircraft, a passenger bus, 2 company cars with the Horizon Airlines logo, and what appeared to be an airport security vehicle. This was no routine stop. In the lavatory, Janet Reynolds dabbed at the cut on her lip, trying to compose herself before facing whatever awaited her outside. The blood had already stained her uniform collar, a visible reminder of how quickly her world had unraveled. 15 years of career building gone in an instant. The worst part was knowing she deserved it. A knock on the door startled her.
"Miss Reynolds," came Miguel's voice. "They're asking for you to open the aircraft door. The representatives are waiting."
Janet took a deep breath, straightened her disheveled uniform, and stepped out. The faces of passengers tracked her movement down the aisle, some curious, others openly hostile, a few recording on their phones. Social media would have fresh content within minutes. Near row 24, she involuntarily glanced at the Washington twins. Their composed faces betrayed no triumph or anger, just a quiet dignity that made Janet feel even smaller. These children had shown more maturity and integrity than she had. At the aircraft door, Janet was met by Horizon Airlines' Charlotte station manager, Elizabeth Chen, and a human resources representative whose grave expression said everything about the seriousness of the situation. Miss Reynolds Chen began formally due to the nature of the incidents reported on this flight. You are being placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Please surrender your company ID and follow Mr. Daniels to the office, where we'll need to take your statement. Janet's fingers trembled as she unpinned the wings from her uniform and handed over her company identification. The symbols of her career, of the person she had believed herself to be, now passed into another's hands. As Janet was escorted off the aircraft, Rebecca Taylor approached the Washington twins with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with Janet's earlier treatment. "Zoe Amber," she said, kneeling beside their shared seat to meet them at eye level. "I'm Rebecca Taylor from Horizon Airlines. I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced today. It was wrong, and we're taking immediate action to make it right." The twins exchanged a glance, their special twin communication passing between them. "Are we in trouble?" Zoe asked quietly, the fear telling its own story about how children of color learn early to worry about being blamed even when they're the victims. "Absolutely not," Rebecca assured them firmly. "You did nothing wrong. In fact, you handled yourselves with incredible maturity. Your parents should be very proud." A small smile tugged at Amber's lips. "They taught us to stand up for ourselves, but to be smart about it."
"They taught you well," Rebecca nodded. "Now we'd like to move you both to first class for the remainder of the journey to Atlanta. Would that be acceptable?"
The twins' eyes widened. First class was something they'd only glimpsed when walking to their regular seats on previous flights with their parents. "Yes, ma'am," they answered in unison. As they gathered their belongings, Harold Barrett stood up from seat 24B. The businessman had been unusually quiet since his earlier apology, but now he addressed Rebecca Taylor directly. "I need to make a statement," he said, his voice carrying through the cabin. "I knew those girls had separate tickets. The flight attendant told me to take the seat anyway, and I went along with it." The admission seemed to physically pain him, his face flushing with shame. "I want that on record." Rebecca nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Barrett. We'll take your statement as well." As the twins were escorted to first class, other passengers began to applaud softly. What had started as one flight attendant's discriminatory action had transformed into a moment of collective witness and accountability. Outside the aircraft, Janet sat in a sterile office with HR Representative James Daniels and a union representative who had been hastily called to the scene. The gravity of her situation was becoming increasingly clear as Daniels outlined the multiple violations documented against her. Discrimination based on race, violation of FAA safety regulations regarding passenger seating, retaliatory behavior toward minors, violation of company service standards, misrepresentation of computer systems to passengers. Daniels read from a tablet. "Miss Reynolds, these are extremely serious charges." "It wasn't about race," Janet protested weakly. "It was about solving the overbooking problem." The union representative Sandra Morris interjected. "Janet, there were multiple ways to handle an overbooking situation that followed protocol. Forcing minors to share a seat was not one of them." "The video evidence is particularly damaging," Daniels continued. "It shows clear differential treatment between passengers. And having a compliance officer on board who witnessed everything firsthand makes this an open and shut case from the company's perspective." Janet's shoulders slumped. There was no defense, no explanation that could justify what she had done. For the first time, she was truly seeing herself as others, saw her not as the competent professional she had imagined herself to be, but as someone whose biases had corrupted her judgment and led her to mistreat children. Back on the aircraft, the remaining passengers were informed that the flight would continue to Atlanta after a brief delay. Many used this opportunity to approach the Washington twins in first class, offering words of support and commendation for their poise during the ordeal. Rebecca Taylor took statements from multiple witnesses, building an airtight case that would protect both the airline and the Washington family in the inevitable legal proceedings to follow. The story had already grown beyond a single flight incident. It had become a flashpoint in the ongoing conversation about race in America. As the plane prepared to resume its journey, Zoe and Amber settled into their spacious first-class seats, each with their own abundant legroom, personal entertainment screens, and attentive service from Miguel, who had taken over. Janet's duties. "Do you think she'll lose her job?" Amber asked her sister quietly. Zoe considered this. "Probably, but maybe that's not the most important thing." "What do you mean?" "Maybe the important thing is that she learns why what she did was wrong. Otherwise, she might just get another job and do the same thing to someone else." Amber nodded thoughtfully. At 10 years old, the twins already understood something that had eluded Janet Reynolds for decades. True accountability required not just consequences, but genuine reflection and change. As the aircraft lifted off from Charlotte to complete its journey to Atlanta, the Washington twins had no way of knowing that their stand against discrimination would inspire others, spark important conversations, and ultimately lead to lasting changes in airline policies. They simply knew they had stood up for themselves, just as their parents had taught them, and that sometimes justice does prevail. 1 week after the fateful Horizon Airlines flight, Zoe and Amber Washington sat in their grandmother's sunlit kitchen in Atlanta, sharing a plate of homemade cookies as they video chatted with their parents back in Chicago. Their extended stay with Grandma Evelyn had been a necessary adjustment as the family navigated the unexpected aftermath of what had been meant to be a routine flight. "How are my brave girls today?" Dr. Washington asked, his proud smile evident even through the tablet screen. "We're good, Dad," Zoe replied. "Grandma's been keeping us busy." Evelyn Washington, a retired civil rights attorney, had been providing her granddaughters with historical context for their experience, helping them place their ordeal within the larger struggle for equality that had defined her own career. "The hearing is tomorrow," Letitia informed them, her principal's organization evident in the neat stack of documents visible beside her. "Janet Reynolds will be facing the airline's disciplinary board. Thomas says it's essentially a formality given the evidence." In a conference room at Horizon Airlines headquarters in Dallas, that very evidence was being reviewed once more by the company's executive team. The video of Janet's discrimination had now been viewed over 12 million times across platforms. News outlets from CNN to local stations had covered the story, with many using it as a launching point for broader discussions about racial bias in customer service industries. CEO Richard Blackwell scrolled through a report on his tablet. "The financial impact is significant. We've had over 3,000 flight cancellations from customers citing this incident. Corporate clients are pausing their contracts pending our response. The FAA, fine for the safety violations alone, is going to exceed $200,000. The legal team is still assessing our liability," added Chief Counsel Margaret Waters. The Washington family has engaged Franklin Law Group, who specialize in discrimination cases. They've been surprisingly reasonable in preliminary discussions, focusing more on systemic changes than punitive damages. "What about Reynolds?" asked the chief operating officer. "The termination hearing is tomorrow," Blackwell confirmed. "Given the evidence and the public relations disaster, the outcome is predetermined. We need to make an example here to show we take this seriously." Across town, in a modest apartment that suddenly seemed too quiet and empty, Janet Reynolds sat alone at her kitchen table. Her phone had been silent for days, former colleagues distancing themselves as the video continued to circulate. The online hatred had been swift and merciless. Her name and face plastered across the internet, her past dredged up by amateur detectives who had uncovered previous complaints that had been buried in Horizon systems. Janet's sister had been the only one to reach out, forwarding an email that had arrived through Janet's now deactivated social media account. It was from Letitia Washington, mother of the twins. "Miss Reynolds," it read, "while we pursue appropriate legal action against your employer for systemic failures, we also believe in personal accountability. If you are genuinely interested in understanding the impact of your actions and working toward meaningful change, we would consider meeting as part of a restorative justice process after legal proceedings conclude. This is not about public apologies or image rehabilitation, but authentic growth. The choice is yours." Janet had read the email a dozen times, alternating between defensive anger and crushing shame. How could this woman, whose children she had mistreated, offer such a path forward? Did she deserve it? Was she even capable of the kind of change Mrs. Washington envisioned? Meanwhile, Harold Barrett was facing his own reckoning. His company, Barrett Financial Services, had placed him on leave after his role in the incident came to light. The video had captured not only Janet's discrimination, but his complicity, his willingness to benefit from the mistreatment of children. His statement in Charlotte had come too late to salvage his reputation. In his corner office, now feeling more like a cage than a symbol of success, Barrett conducted a video call with his company's board of directors. "The optics are devastating," Harold said the chairwoman bluntly. "Clients are walking away. We've lost the Westfield account, and Johnson and Pierce are reviewing their options." "I've issued a public apology," Barrett protested. "I've reached out to the Washington family." "It's not enough," came the response. "This incident has revealed a character issue. The board has lost confidence in your judgment." Barrett ended the call, knowing his 20-year career at the company was effectively over. Like Janet, he was learning that one moment of moral failure, captured and shared, could unravel decades of careful image building. Rebecca Taylor's experience had taken a different turn. As Horizon Airlines chief compliance officer, her documentation of the incident and immediate intervention had positioned her as a corporate hero of sorts. In the executive boardroom, she presented her recommendations for systemic changes. "Random compliance audits aren't sufficient," she explained. "We need regular anti-bias training with real consequences for violations. Our incident reporting system needs to be overhauled. No more burying complaints from minority passengers. And we need clear protocols for overbooked flights that don't leave gate agents and flight attendants making subjective decisions about who stays and who goes." Blackwell nodded. "Draft a comprehensive plan. Budget won't be an issue. This is now an existential priority for the company." The ripple effects extended beyond the individuals directly involved. Other airlines began reviewing their own policies, conscious of their vulnerability to similar incidents. The FAA announced a special review of passenger safety compliance with regard to proper seating and seatbelt usage. Civil rights organizations reached out to the Washington family, recognizing the potential impact of their case. The twins had become reluctant symbols in a movement larger than themselves, their composed resistance in the face of discrimination resonating with millions who had experienced similar treatment. In Atlanta, Grandma Evelyn helped the girls process this unexpected spotlight. "Your experience matters," she told them as they helped her prepare dinner. "But remember, you get to decide how much of yourselves you share with the world. Your first responsibility is to your own well-being, not to being symbols for others." The twins considered this wisdom as they chopped vegetables for the salad. They had received hundreds of messages from other children who had faced discrimination and found courage in their example. It was overwhelming, but also empowering. "Do you think anything will really change?" Amber asked her grandmother. Evelyn considered the question with the perspective of someone who had seen both progress and setbacks throughout her lifetime. "Change is rarely quick or complete," she said thoughtfully. "But sometimes when the right moment meets the right response, like you two standing up for yourselves with such dignity, it creates an opening. And openings, my dears, are where possibility lives." As the Washington family navigated their unexpected role in a national conversation about race and accountability, Janet Reynolds prepared for the hearing that would formally end her career. Harold Barrett began the humbling process of rebuilding his life and reconsidering his values. Rebecca Taylor drafted policies that would become industry standards for years to come. And on social media, the hashtag number 2tickets1seat evolved from a specific call-out to a broader rallying cry against everyday discrimination in all its forms. What had begun as one flight attendant's biased decision had catalyzed conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and living rooms across the country, conversations that were long overdue and necessary for genuine progress. The twins' ordeal had exposed not just individual prejudice, but the systemic failures that allowed such prejudice to persist unchecked. In that exposure lay the seeds of meaningful change that would come not through a single viral moment, but through the sustained work of accountability, education, and reform that would follow. 6 months later, Janet Reynolds stood nervously outside the community center in Chicago's Hyde Park neighborhood. The red brick building housed the newly established Washington Foundation for Youth Empowerment, created with a portion of the settlement funds from Horizon Airlines. Janet checked her watch, still 15 minutes early for the meeting that both terrified and offered her a glimmer of hope. The past half year had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. The termination hearing had been brief and decisive, ending her 15-year career with Horizon. The airline had issued a public statement distancing itself from her actions while announcing comprehensive reforms to prevent similar incidents. Janet had become briefly the face of discrimination in America, her name and image circulating in news cycles and social media discussions about bias in customer service. The financial consequences had been severe. Unable to find work in the aviation industry and struggling to pay her bills, Janet had been forced to sell her condo and move in with her younger sister in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. But the personal reckoning had been even more profound. As part of her settlement with Horizon, Janet had been required to complete an intensive anti-bias training program. Initially resentful, she had gradually opened herself to the uncomfortable truths about her own prejudices. The program had forced her to examine not just the incident with the Washington twins, but patterns throughout her life and career, the subtle ways she had treated passengers differently based on race, the assumptions she had made, the selective enforcement of rules. Most significantly, the program had connected her with her biracial granddaughter, Sophia. Janet's son had married a black woman 5 years earlier, a union Janet had quietly disapproved of, leading to an estrangement. Sophia, now 3 years old, had been a stranger to Janet until the program's family reconciliation component encouraged her to reach out. Getting to know Sophia had changed something fundamental in Janet. Seeing the world through the eyes of a child who shared her blood but would face challenges Janet had never considered brought home the reality and injustice of racism in ways no training session could. When Letitia Washington had followed up on her offer of a restorative justice meeting Janet had accepted, though the prospect filled her with trepidation. Now, standing outside the foundation building, she gathered her courage and walked in. Inside, she was greeted by Thomas Franklin, the Washington family's attorney, who led her to a conference room where Derek and Letitia Washington waited. The twins were not present. This initial meeting would determine whether involving them would be appropriate. Miss Reynolds, Dr. Washington acknowledged her with a formal nod. The renowned surgeon's expression was reserved but not hostile. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Janet began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I want to start by saying that I'm truly sorry for how I treated your daughters. There's no excuse for what I did." Letitia Washington studied her carefully. "Miss Reynolds, we didn't arrange this meeting for apologies alone. We want to understand if you've genuinely reflected on why your actions were harmful and what you've learned since then." Janet nodded, appreciating the directness. "The past 6 months have been illuminating. The anti-bias training helped me see patterns I'd been blind to. But the real change came when I reconnected with my granddaughter, Sophia. She showed them a photo on her phone of a smiling toddler with curly hair. I realized I'd been living in denial about my own prejudices and about how those prejudices might affect her life. The conversation that followed was challenging, honest, and ultimately transformative. Janet shared her journey of confronting her biases, while the Washingtons explained the impact of such incidents on their daughters and the broader context of the discrimination Black Americans face daily. There were uncomfortable moments, difficult questions, and no easy absolution, just the hard work of genuine understanding. 2 weeks later, Zoe and Amber Washington met Janet for the first time since the flight. The foundation space provided a neutral, supportive environment for this carefully structured encounter. "We've heard about your granddaughter," Amber said, breaking an initial awkward silence. "What's she like?" The simple question opened a channel of authentic communication. Janet shared stories about Sophia while the twins talked about their experiences since the flight. They had returned to school as reluctant celebrities navigating attention they hadn't sought while trying to maintain their normal lives. The hardest part, Zoe admitted, was knowing that some people only saw us as victims or symbols, not just as kids. Janet nodded, understanding, washing over her. "I did that too on the flight. I didn't see you as individual children with rights and feelings. I saw you through the lens of my biases." This recognition that dehumanization lies at the heart of discrimination represented the core of Janet's growth. The meeting concluded with no dramatic declarations of forgiveness, but with a shared commitment to the ongoing work of awareness and change. Meanwhile, the incident had catalyzed significant reforms in the airline industry. Horizon Airlines had implemented the Washington Protocol for handling unaccompanied minors, ensuring they received appropriate accommodation and care regardless of race or background. The company had overhauled its complaint system, with Rebecca Taylor leading a new division focused exclusively on equity in customer experience. Harold Barrett, after losing his executive position, had undergone his own transformation. The public shame of his complicity had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his privilege and the easy morality of never intervening when injustice didn't personally affect him. He had begun working with corporate diversity initiatives, sharing his experience as a cautionary tale for other executives. The most profound changes perhaps had occurred within Zoe and Amber themselves. The twins had emerged from the ordeal with a deeper understanding of their own strength and resilience. Working with their parents and grandmother, they had channeled their experience into the foundation, which provided resources to help minority children understand their rights and navigate situations of potential discrimination. On a sunny Saturday, 6 months after their first meeting, Janet volunteered at the foundation's community event, a workshop teaching young people about their rights while traveling. As she helped distribute materials, she noticed Amber watching her thoughtfully. "Miss Reynolds," the young girl said, approaching with the directness that characterized both twins, "do you think you're different now than you were on that plane?" Janet considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yes," she answered honestly. "But becoming different isn't a destination. It's a journey I'm still on. Some days are harder than others, but I'm committed to continuing." Amber nodded, satisfied with the authenticity of the response. "That's what Grandma says, too. That change is a process, not an event." Across the room, Dr. Washington observed the interaction, noting the growth in his daughter and the genuine transformation in the woman who had once discriminated against her. The incident on Flight 2857 had caused pain and disruption, but it had also created openings, opportunities for individuals to change, for systems to improve, for progress to advance. The Washington twins had shown that even children could stand firm against injustice with dignity and composure. Janet had demonstrated that even after a profound moral failure, redemption was possible through genuine accountability and growth. Horizon Airlines had proven that corporate culture could evolve when properly motivated. Each represented a different facet of the complex work required for social progress. As the community event concluded, Zoe joined her sister and Janet, completing the circle of this unlikely connection. "We're starting a peer education program at school," she announced, "teaching other kids about standing up for themselves and each other." Janet smiled, recognizing how the twins were transforming their difficult experience into something that would help others. "That's wonderful. You two have taught me more than any training program could." We all have something to learn from each other, Letitia said, joining the conversation. That's the foundation of real change. And in that moment, different people from different backgrounds united in the ongoing work of building a more just world. The true resolution of the flight incident became clear. It wasn't about punishment or forgiveness alone, but about the transformative power of accountability, reflection, and commitment to doing better. The viral video had captured a moment of discrimination, but the story that unfolded afterward revealed something more profound: the possibility of growth, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the ongoing journey toward the world we aspire to create. This story illustrates how prejudice can hide behind professional facades until a moment of crisis exposes it. Janet's discrimination wasn't just about personal bias. It reflected systemic issues that allowed such behavior to continue unchecked for years. The Washington twins demonstrate that dignity and composure in the face of injustice can be more powerful than anger or retaliation. Their calm documentation proved more effective than emotional reactions would have been. The bystander effect is another crucial lesson. Harold Barrett's initial complicity shows how easy it is to benefit from discrimination without acknowledging personal responsibility. Rebecca Taylor, conversely, represents the impact one person can have when they choose to intervene rather than observe. Perhaps most importantly, this story teaches us that accountability doesn't end with punishment. True justice includes the opportunity for genuine transformation. Janet's journey from denial to awareness to active change illustrates that redemption is possible through honest reflection and meaningful action. The ripple effects of standing up against injustice often extend far beyond the initial incident, creating openings for policy changes and broader social progress that benefit many others. What was the most powerful moment in this story for you? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and had to decide whether to speak up? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores important social issues. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for watching, and remember, small acts of courage can create lasting change in our world.